Hello everyone, Ace here, and today, well, I'm just going to have to go ahead and say it. Both Sargon of Akkad and Vee are ultimately correct in their interpretations of the Jedi Order. However, they are also at the same time both incorrect as well. And yes, this is a very clear contradiction, especially when you consider that Sargon's position and Vee's position also contradict one another. And this, of course, no doubt raises quite a few questions. So to start, let's answer the conundrum of how these two contradictory positions manage to both be right and wrong at the exact same time. And the simple answer is ultimately that there are two Star Wars universes with two very different sets of lore. There is the old established lore known as the Star Wars EU, which is no longer considered canon, but is easily the more popular and more understood of the two, and there is the newer official Disney canon, which ultimately replaced it. And while we will most certainly be getting into greater detail on the official Disney canon later on in this video, I do believe it's now a good time to move on to the positions held by both Sargon of Akkad and Vee. And to start off, Sargon of Akkad's video titled "The Jedi Philosophy is an Absolute Mess" from April 19th of 2020 argues that the Jedi are untrustworthy narrators, as well as violent extremists that routinely contradict themselves in their own philosophy. And admittedly, it is a video that was created by someone who self-admittedly wasn't necessarily a hardcore Star Wars fan. It should be noted that Sargon did create a follow-up video titled "Star Wars is Pro-Jedi Propaganda" on May 2nd of 2020 as well. And again, I do need to reiterate that Sargon's positions came from a comparatively surface-level reading of Star Wars. In response to Sargon's videos, Vee decided to upload his own video titled "The Jedi Philosophy is Not an Absolute Mess, Sargon" on the 28th of February 2021, in which Vee goes much deeper into Star Wars lore to show that Sargon is ultimately incorrect in his interpretations of the Jedi philosophy. And it is a pretty good video in its own right. But unfortunately, Vee's video and positions were necessarily reliant on the old, now non-canonical lore of the EU. And so while Vee did demonstrate quite substantially that Sargon is wrong about the Jedi philosophy in the old EU lore, his in-depth analysis on elements such as how Darth Plagueis the Wise could keep people from dying, or what the Jedis mean by bringing balance to the Force, or even how the Force works to some degrees, all those points are no longer really valid when talking about the new official Disney canon. And while Sargon's videos were uploaded before elements of the official Disney canon had been released, and in my opinion would ultimately vindicate his position in the new canon, the same cannot really be said for Vee's video, as it was released in February when the first elements of what we're going to be talking about became available in January. In other words, Vee made the better video. However, thanks to Disney's utter ineptitude in handling the Star Wars IP, Sargon's videos are ultimately more reflective of what Star Wars is right now officially. And the evidence that I will be using to show that Sargon is correct about the new official canon comes from the Star Wars High Republic comic produced by Marvel and the Star Wars High Republic Adventures comic produced by IDW. And so to start off, let's talk about just how reliable the Jedi actually are as narrators and storytellers, which is a good way to start talking about Master Bota, who is supposedly a historical figure by the time of the High Republic, and whose feats have inspired something of a Saturday morning cartoon show that the Jedi use as propaganda for their younglings. The purpose of this particular propaganda, of course, being to glorify the abilities of the Jedi, while at the same time doing their best to demean the Sith. And it should be noted that this particular piece of propaganda is so utterly overt that even the younglings themselves know that they are in fact being lied to. However, that still does not stop the young Jedi who grew up watching these holotapes from seeing them as a means of emotional inspiration and support, which suggests that in and of itself, the purpose of the Master Bota holotapes is to emotionally manipulate the younglings who will later go on to become Jedi. And some of you may now have noticed that this contradicts to some degrees the Jedi philosophy, which at its core does ultimately hinge on the suppression of emotions. And now is a good time to move on to just how much the Jedi Order manages to keep contradicting itself in both the High Republic and High Republic Adventures. And I believe it's important to note that the High Republic is supposed to be the golden age for both the Republic itself as well as the Jedi Order, meaning that this is how the Jedi act when they are at their absolute strongest and their absolute moral peak. So when you see Jedi actively saying, and I quote, "No one expects you not to feel the things you feel," and following it up with, "It's what you do that matters most," after having just witnessed the individual that they are talking to try to force choke a child, and then try to shoot that said child with a blaster as they were trying to get away, does truly highlight just how different the Jedi are in the official Disney canon in comparison to the old established EU lore. This difference becomes even more extreme when you realize that a second Jedi also chimes in to state that while the Council has decided not to train this new Force user in Jedi philosophy, they will still train them how to use the Force itself. Just as I've said, without the sense of responsibility that comes from learning the Jedi philosophy. Because what could possibly go wrong? Another good example of how the Jedi Order is different in the official Disney canon in comparison to the EU lore is how another Jedi Master named Jedi Master Skier hacks a Nihil to literal pieces in a blind rage because another Nihil caused Master Skier to lose an arm that, by the way, will grow back. And while Master Skier was caught in the act of doing this by another Jedi, he was never ever punished for it. In fact, much later on, the Jedi Knight who caught him in the act still seeks guidance from him, and when she says, "Master, I shouldn't have lost my temper, lesson number 1, there is no passion," Master Skier promptly responds with, and I quote, "There is always passion, it's how we control it that matters." Which is advice that of course flies directly in the face of the Jedi Code, which, as Jedi Knight Keeve did correctly point out, says, and I quote, "There is no passion, there is serenity." Of course, Jedi Master Skier is not the only one to provide advice that directly contradicts the code either in these comics. For example, in the High Republic Adventures, we actually get a flashback where Jedi Master Ubratuk provides advice to his young Padawan Fazala, stating, and I quote, "Fear is not the enemy," which of course once again flies in the face of the Jedi Code and is still a ridiculous statement, even in the part of Star Wars that Disney considers to still be canon. As Episode 1 of Phantom Menace made it very clear that one of the reasons that the Jedi Council did not approve of Anakin's admission into the Order ultimately stemmed from the amount of fear that Anakin had at the time, specifically fear concerning his mother's health and well-being, which Jedi Master Yoda quite correctly described as a path to the dark side. And yes, I know that the official reason that was given by the Jedi Council was that Anakin was simply too old. However, anyone who has seen the film knows that this was at least part of the reason for that decision as well. But let's now move on to the two biggest and most extreme examples of just how contradictory the Jedi philosophy is in the newly established canon by Disney. The first example I would like to provide comes from the final moments of the Dringir saga in the High Republic, the Dringir being a parasitic, mind-controlling plant-like life form, which up to this point has caused extreme and excessive damage, and resulted in a countless loss of life. This resulted in the Jedi forming an alliance with the Hutt cartel, and then leading an invasion on the Dringir homeworld once they found out its location. But once they finally reached the big boss creature that is in control of the root mind of the Dringir, the Jedi chose to imprison it, which coincidentally was something that the Sith had apparently done before themselves, and something that the creature being imprisoned rightly calls out, stating, and I quote, "Now you do the same as the enemy you despised." To which Jedi Knight Keeve responds with, and I quote, "No, they did it to protect themselves. We do it to protect everyone else." And I really want you to think about that for a moment. Jedi Knight Keeve just vilified the Sith for doing something as being selfish, but then tried to unironically make the argument that it was perfectly okay when a Jedi did it. This is the Jedi Order openly trying to engage in emotionally manipulative tribalism in order to make themselves seem morally justified and righteous in their actions, whilst trying to at the exact same time condemn the Sith for doing the exact same thing. If you ever wanted an example of how the Jedi Order cannot in any way be trusted in the new official Disney canon, then this is almost as good of an example as you can get. However, there is another even more extreme example of this as well, and it occurs in the very first issue of the High Republic. back when Kiev was just a Padawan, as the Jedi Order ultimately chose to give her a test to make her a Jedi Knight, in which test they chose to put an entire populated planet into danger, just to see if the Padawan had what it took to save the planet, its cities, and its people. They accomplished this by sending a swarm of space locusts to that said planet, using their newly built Starlight beacon to send out a signal that would divert the space locusts from their usual migratory routes. And while Kiev was ultimately successful in diverting these space locusts away from the planet, it did result in a very real loss of life. Although that did not stop the Jedi from proceeding along with the ceremony to knight Kiev, whilst shouting, and I quote, "for light and life," in a completely tone-deaf display of celebrating the fact that their Padawan was able to save the planet that they specifically put in danger, but was still sadly not able to save everyone. In other words, the Jedi shouting for light and life was their way of saying, well, at least we didn't murder as many people as we could have with that little test of ours. And given just how extreme that particular example is, I think it's safe to say that not only does Sargon have a point in his videos and his interpretation of the Jedi Order, at least as far as the official Disney canon is concerned, but it also begs the question as to whether or not Emperor Palpatine actually did anything wrong by executing Order 66. Because at least as far as the official Disney canon is concerned, you would be hard-pressed to find the Sith doing anything nearly as evil as the Jedi have in the High Republic. Of course, when it comes to the old established EU lore, V is ultimately the one with the more accurate interpretation of what the Jedi Order is. And I still have to come out and say that he has the better video overall. But speaking of specifically the official Disney canon that is currently being promoted, Sargon's interpretations are far more in line with what we have seen so far. And given what I have covered today, I'm sure you'll agree that both Sargon of Akkad and V managed to have accurate interpretations on the Jedi Order. It just depends on which exact Jedi Order we are talking about. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.